Hello, everyone, and welcome to the debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us, and happy Monday. Okay, so the Mueller investigation is finished. It's complete, but it looks like things are just beginning. So we have the latest on that. Plus, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in the U.S. ahead of his elections in Israel. Plus, Apple is announcing something big today. So we're going to have all of that for you. But first, the headlines.
New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is launching an investigation into the deadly attacks on two mosques.
There will be a focus on whether our intelligence community was concentrating its resources appropriately and whether there were any reports that could or should have been alerted them to this attack.
50 people died in the shootings.
A big boost for Democratic presidential hopeful Pete Buttigieg. The mayor of South Bend, Indiana, has soared to third place in a new poll of the Iowa caucus. Buttigieg picked up support from 11% of likely Democratic voters in Iowa, behind only Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders.
Patriots star Rob Gronkowski retiring from football.
Yes, he is turning 30 this year and reportedly wants to give acting a shot and maybe even pro wrestling.
Gronk calls retirement the biggest decision of his life. All those injuries obviously took a toll, but he says he's moving on with a big smile. Top seed barely survived an upset. Duke escaped with a 77-76 win over Central Florida to move on to the Sweet 16. The Knights had two shots roll off the rim in the final 5 seconds.
I feel bad that they lost. I mean, I'm happy. You know, it's like the yin and the yang here, because they were deserving of winning, and they were so good. And I'm so proud that those kids played at the level of their coach.
All right, the biggest story in Washington, the Mueller report, it's complete, and we want to go straight to Lindsey Graham. He's speaking right now about this report.
Determinations are there, but those are sort of the broad outlines, in my view, of the limitations of sharing the information with the public. My desire is for the public to get as much of the report as possible, consistent with the outlines that of concerns I've just announced. As to my relationship with the special counsel inquiry, August the 3rd, 2017, I introduced legislation, the Special Counsel Independence Protection Act, with Senator Booker, Coons, and Tillis. At that time, there was a lot of chatter by the president and others about Mueller being on a witch hunt, and that chatter continued. I just wanted the public to know that I believe that special counsels now in the future should be protected to the extent possible. And the reason I introduced the legislation as a Republican is to let people in South Carolina and the country know that I thought Mr. Mueller was not on a witch hunt, and that Mr. Mueller was highly qualified and the right guy to pick to deal with such a difficult issue. As to Mr. Mueller, on March 14th, 2018, the only reason that Mr. Mueller could be dismissed is for cause. I see no cause when it comes to Mr. Mueller. He needs to be able to do his job independent of any political influence. I pledge to the American people, as a Republican, to make sure that Mr. Mueller can continue to do his job without any interference. November 2018. I am confident the Mueller investigation will be allowed to come to a solid conclusion, that there will be no political influence put on Mr. Mueller by Mr. Whitaker at the time to do anything other than Mr. Mueller's job. I am confident that Mr. Mueller will be allowed to do his job without interference. January 2019. Since his appointment.
All right, so that was Senator Lindsey Graham speaking there. I want to bring in Pierre Thomas and Terry Moran in our D.C. Bureau. We also have Ben Siegel on Capitol Hill to break this all down. Pierre, the biggest headlines are reading no collusion, but there are still lots of questions around the obstruction of justice. What's the biggest takeaway in your opinion?
Again, I think at the end of the day, we have to come back to the fact that after 22 months of investigation, 500 witnesses interviewed, 2,800 subpoenas issued, 500 search warrants issued, they did not find any evidence that anyone connected to Trump or his campaign directly conspired with the Russians to impact the 2016 election. That is the dominant headline, and everything else flows from that. On the obstruction of justice issue, it's fascinating in the sense that clearly we don't know the details yet. There were some things that the president did that Bob Mueller had some issues with in terms of whether he obstructed justice, but there were other things on the other side of the ledger that argued for it not being obstruction of justice. We don't know those specifics yet. We do know that Bill Barr, the current sitting Attorney General, decided that he did not believe that you could bring an obstruction of justice offense against the president because you didn't have the underlying crime. In fact, no collusion.
All right, Terry, so the president is already taking a victory lap. What do you make of this?
Well, he's entitled to it. It turns out that he had it accurately from the moment he was asked about it. There was no collusion, according to this exhaustive investigation by, one of the leading prosecutors in the history of the country who had free rein, and you just saw the numbers, went and looked everywhere he possibly could. So the president is entitled to that, and that will have a major political effect. First, it cements the trust that millions upon millions of Americans have for Donald Trump. Second, it gives him a political weapon, not just against Democrats, but against us in the media. He is going to stand up and say, I was telling the truth. The Democrats who are trying to get me and undo the 2016 election, try to undemocratically undo that election, and the fake news media, as he says, they were wrong. And that is going to be part of his re-election campaign, no question about it. So the president stands before the country right now a very different figure than he was 3 days ago. The shaping narrative of this presidency has been that maybe he was a traitor. That was really what the investigation was about. That was what Saturday Night Live and all kinds of other media outlets were promulgating. It turns out he's not. And as I say, that will increase his credibility with many, many people, and he is entitled to that victory lap.
All right, Ben Siegel's on Capitol Hill, as I mentioned. Ben, what's been the reaction there from the Democrats specifically?
Well, no surprise that this has really broken along those party lines. Democrats are not taking issue with what Robert Mueller has found in terms of the lack of conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia to influence the election. Instead, they're focusing on this question of obstruction. They have more questions than answers, they say, about this letter that the Attorney General released yesterday. Why does Robert Mueller not come to a conclusion on the question of obstruction of justice, but at the same time write in his report that this does not exonerate the president? They say they are planning to ask the Attorney General and even Robert Mueller to testify before Congress, and they're willing to subpoena both of them and also the Mueller report to get the answers. Again, they are focused on reading the full Mueller report, getting that report to the public. You've heard a little bit of this from Senator Graham, and Republicans are taking a victory lap. Like Terry said, they are treating this as vindication of one of the nagging issues hanging over the Trump presidency, and some of them, including Graham, who's the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, have even suggested looking into how this all started. How did Robert Mueller get set on this path if at the end of it he didn't find any evidence of conspiracy or collusion? So it's possible that he starts looking into how this began under the Obama administration in the Justice Department then.
Lots of questions, and I think, Pierre, the biggest question is, where do we go from here? I think that's what all the American people want to know. What's the next steps?
Well, the next step is that you have Bob Mueller, who will work with the Attorney General Bill Barr and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to look at the Mueller report and determine how much of it can be released to the public. They are going to participate in that process. We're told it's already underway. And the other thing is that there's some offshoot investigations, criminal investigations ongoing in the Southern District of New York regarding proposed campaign finance violations by the president allegedly and others. There's also an investigation looking into his inauguration. So this is far from over, much to be determined.
All right, Terry, and I just want to get your final words on everything. Terry?
Well, look, I think the real winner here in the long run, in the heat of the moment, it's hard to sense this, but the real winner is the rule of law in the United States. Look, you know, I was a foreign correspondent for 5 years and traveled to a lot of countries where a president never would have been investigated, right? And certainly, if there was political momentum on the other side, wouldn't have been cleared. It seems to me that the majority of fair-minded Americans will trust this result, and deep down over the long runs, that means they'll feel better about the way the country works, even if they were hoping the other way. I think at the end of the day, people will trust this result, in part because a patriot like Robert Mueller conducted himself in such a way as to give no one any cause, really, that he was somehow compromised. The rule of law survives and thrives in the United States.
All right, thank you, Terry. I want to thank Pierre, also thanking Ben for all of your insight. If you guys want to see more about this report, we're going to have a special live coverage at 1:30 p.m. today. So in the meantime, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will leave early from his planned visit to Washington after a rocket attack hit a house near Tel Aviv. So I want to bring in Jordana Miller, who's in Jerusalem, with more. Jordana, what exactly happened? This had to have been terrifying this morning, yes?
We've been hearing such terrifying stories from the people who witnessed this, a rocket hitting into a house, and this family of 7, really only by the grace of those air sirens that went off. They had about 30 seconds to take cover in their safe home, and that's literally how they survived. Looking at those pictures, we see their home just destroyed, and especially a harrowing are the shots of their child's room with that bassinet just covered in debris. So this was just a harrowing scene. Now Israel responding, blaming Hamas, the terrorist group that controls the Gaza Strip, for this attack. Hamas is denying any involvement. They say they're investigating. But we are hearing reports now that Israel has told some of those civilians in the south of Israel to prepare to hear explosions, that we may now see those reprisal Israeli airstrikes, which is commonly what happens after these kinds of strikes.
Yes, so that's pretty crazy. You know, he's leaving early. Netanyahu is leaving early, but this trip was supposed to be a big one for him because he's up for re-election. He also has some legal troubles. What did he want to get out of this meeting?
That's right. This was supposed to be his victory lap of sorts for the president's recent recognition by tweet of Israel's claims over the Golan Heights. And he really wanted this to be a kind of optics and really boost for his close ties with the U.S. He is down in the polls. He's dogged by corruption allegations, and he wanted voters here in Israel to see him as the strong leader. But now he's going to have to duck out and come back here to deal with this. And he is going to hope in just the partial time that he gets with the president to at least exude some kind of, the close cooperation between Israel and the United States, especially on the issue of Iran. And maybe we'll hear some remarks about the Golan Heights. There were reports maybe the president was going to sign some kind of executive order. We'll have to see. But Netanyahu certainly, this was probably the worst news for him now that he will have to come back and deal with this security situation, which is really building. And it's a very tense situation here.
All right, Jordana Miller in Jerusalem, thank you so much. So we've been keeping tabs on the major cyclone that hit the regions of southern Africa. The road to recovery will be long for the people there. But Ian Panel's on the ground in Beira, one of the hardest hit cities, with an inside look at some of the destruction.
I'm in Beira, Mozambique, one of the areas that was badly hit in that cyclone. Incredible to imagine, but we're actually in a school. This used to be like the school assembly hall. You can see there's been a fire over there, but the roof has literally just been blown off. This is the school desks here that are now being used for people to essentially just dry their washing. It's a woman here having to use an old bucket just to wash the clothes. You can see how dirty the water is there. If we can come underneath these temporary washing lines here, let me hold a line up for you. and we get a sense of what living conditions are like. The people who are here are people who were displaced by this cyclone. It's now 10 days, 11 days since the cyclone hit. Many of these people lost their homes instantly. It took them a while to get here. This is one of 5 centres across Beira that is now housing people who are essentially homeless. This is now effectively the kitchen. You see this woman over here who we were talking to earlier. She's cooking, it's like a maize porridge, a bit like grits, I guess, which she's been cooking for hours there. Someone else is cooking beans. But that's it. There are no other cooking facilities. The conditions here are completely insanitary. There's some more cooking pots over there, but what I want to show you is just down this hallway. So you can see this is obviously where the main school was. There's a classroom there. Hello, thank you. Classroom there. Another classroom here. Well, let's just go inside here, because this is where people are having to sleep. Hello. So a lot of women here with young children, and this is now their living accommodation. There's nowhere for the kids to run around, there's no space for families, there's no privacy. The elderly lady up there, we were just talking about her earlier, I don't know if you can make her out, but she suffers from heart problems, and the people who run this centre are telling me she lost her medicine in the storm. They're just making up what medicine they think she should have, but apparently it's not working. Again, the desks here are just being used for storage of pots and people's belongings. They don't have much, obviously no lessons going on the blackboard. One last thing I want to show you, which just underlines quite how terrible conditions are here. We're not going to go inside, but there is one bathroom in here, and that bathroom is used by 545 people who are in this centre. So no kitchen, no real washing facilities, no real bedrooms, no clothing, no shelter, and at the moment no prospect of things getting better unless aid starts to come in. The thing that people need above all is building materials. Obviously clothes and food and those other things really matter, but it's building materials in order for them to try and rebuild even rudimentary shelters so they can leave this place, have some privacy and get on with rebuilding their lives.
All right, Ian, a tough situation there. Thank you so much. So to Boeing, still plenty of questions about what caused the 737 MAX jet air crash in Ethiopia. I want to go to David Curley, who joins us in the Washington, D.C. bureau. David, the Wall Street Journal reported that the CEO of Ethiopian Airlines told them in an interview that the anti-stall system was activated in the second crash. What does this mean for Boeing?
Actually, for Boeing, it may mean that they have a singular problem that the software update they're working on and should be certified this week will fix this problem, which really isn't a problem other than pilot error. The fact that the pilots, both in Lion Air and if this is true in Ethiopia, that the MCAS system activated. We don't know what happened, why it activated, what the pilots did or didn't do, but the procedure is to shut the system off, and it would appear that they may not have in Ethiopia. So without having all the data from Ethiopia, and they've had it for 9 days now and have not shared it, and the CEO just saying he believes that MCAS may have been activated in this case, that's the anti-stall system, may actually end up being good news for Boeing, that the software fix they have will get this fleet back up in the air sooner rather than later. But there is a huge public perception problem with this aircraft right now that Boeing's going to have to overcome.
So Boeing said they're working closely with the FAA to get these software updates. What are the updates?
So the way that Boeing designed this system, and the reason is that this new version of jet has bigger engines that hang a little bit farther out on the wings, and they realized in flight testing that the plane had a tendency with those engines where they were to start to nose up a little bit on its own. So if you do that too much, you stall and start to fall out of the air. So what Boeing did was put in this system that aggressively noses down the aircraft if in case this MCAS system goes into effect. So the 3 fixes will be, 1, instead of 1 data point activating that system to nose down, there will be 2. There's a sensor on each side of the aircraft. Also, the nose down move will not be as severe. It will not be quite as severe of an angle. And in the current MCAS, and the one that happened in Lion Air and apparently in Ethiopia, it continues to re-engage. So it'll nose down and the pilot could pull it back or trim out to try and level out the plane, and the MCAS would activate again and start to nose down again. In the new software update, it'll only do that once. So those are the three big changes that are coming. Some additional training. It's unclear whether simulator time will be required for all pilots or just some pilots.
So if the updates are approved, does this mean the planes are going to be back in the air pretty soon? People will be back on these planes?
Well, if it's certified, then it's up to the airlines to install the software and make sure that their pilots are up to date on the training, whatever is necessary, and then decide when to go ahead and start flying their fleet. The FAA, in certifying it, will probably have some steps that have to be taken, and then the fleet can fly again in the United States. And already Canada and the EU say they're going to certify this on their own, and they'll be on their own timeline. It could still be several weeks before these aircraft are flying again. In fact, American Airlines canceled some flights up through a date in April because spring breaks, and they're worried about people who might not be able to get on planes. So as a precautionary effort, they canceled some flights, not knowing exactly when their planes will be back in the air.
All right, David, thank you so much.
You bet.
And on to some varsity blues. A dozen of the people involved in that massive college scandal, cheating scandal, are appearing in court today. So I want to go to Lindsay Davis, who's in Boston. Lindsay, who's exactly there and what are they facing?
Hello to you, Kimberly. We're talking about 12 defendants. 6 of them are coaches. They're expected to appear in the Boston courthouse right behind me today. All of them in some way implicated in this college admissions scandal and in some way associated to Rick Singer, the alleged ringleader. Now, Rick Singer is accused of raking in about $25 million, of course, accepting this money from wealthy parents to get their children into some of the most elite colleges and universities in our country. He once boasted to a parent that he had worked with more than 750 wealthy families. So 33 people have been charged so far. If what he says is true, we can likely expect a lot more indictments still to come. We're expecting that this roughly dozen group of defendants are going to go in, hear the charges before them. Largely, this is basically a racketeering scandal here, racketeering charge. They'll hear their charges and then discuss bail options with the judge today. You know, one thing that's really interesting is that we've heard so many details here and know so much about this, like that we've learned in the past nearly 2 weeks since this scandal broke. But what we haven't heard is the person who allegedly shelled over $6.5 million to Singer to get their child into one of these elite universities. We still haven't heard their name and also the university that was involved.
Has there been any significant action from any of these schools since this story broke?
Yeah, so far we know about a handful of the schools that are involved, and each of them says they're reviewing the case, taking a case-by-case basis with each of the students. We do know at USC and also at Yale, which we just learned today, they said that there were applicants that they had accepted. They are now rescinding those offers. As far as students that are already in the pipeline, sounds like at this point, especially at USC, they say that those cases are basically on hold, which means that those students are not able to transfer the credits. They're not able to register for classes at this time. There are some schools that are basically saying, look, we don't have any proof that the children knew about this financial arrangement. In that case, we're not going to take any action. There are other schools that are not revealing, but that they say that they are investigating and that they will take the appropriate action.
All right, Lindsay, we appreciate it. Thank you. So I want to stay with this story. You guys know hip-hop star Dr. Dre. Well, he took to Instagram on Sunday, trashing the families caught up in this admissions scandal. He posted a picture with his daughter, and the caption read, "My daughter got accepted into USC all on her own. No jail time." Those comments raised eyebrows, though, because a few years ago, Dre and producer Jimmy Iovine made a $70 million donation to USC and had a building named after them. And surprise, surprise, by late Sunday, the post was deleted. So, okay, we're moving on to Apple. If you haven't heard, it's showtime. That's the tagline on the invitation to this highly anticipated star-studded event today in California. I want to go to Dana Wallman. She's the editor-in-chief of Engadget and joins us live outside of Cupertino. Dana, what's the mood? I'm sure it's buzzing.
Yes, good morning. This definitely does not feel like your typical Apple event. We are so used to hardware launches, a new iPhone, a new iPad perhaps, but Apple, it got all of its hardware news out of the way last week. So today, it's focused just on its services business. So this really is a special and different kind of setup for Apple today.
Yeah, so can you give us a little bit more details about the subscription services that they're supposed to announce?
Absolutely, yes. So Apple has been long rumored to be working on both a subscription news service and also a video streaming service. Now, a lot of what we've heard obviously is unconfirmed. We're about to hear the details straight from Apple. But the rumors so far suggest that the video piece, at least, will be something of a modern-day cable package, where, for instance, you would get not just Apple's original content, which it's been very open about the fact that it's working on, but perhaps also lower-cost subscriptions to HBO, Starz, Showtime. Those providers are all rumored to be on board with this service.
All right, and so I'm just curious, how is this going to be different from the Netflixes and the Hulus of the world? It's just more content.
It is more content, certainly. An interesting mix, though, of original content from Apple. And I will go out of my way here to say that Apple has not yet proven itself on the original content front the way Netflix has with House of Cards, the way Amazon has with all of its series. So Apple does have a lot of proving, does have to prove itself on the original content front. But people will be getting that and content from other providers that they would normally have to sort of cherry pick. And for cord cutters, it could be great news because no one really wants to cobble together a number of subscriptions. The convenience of packaging together content from a lot of providers that people trust and are interested in could be appealing to people.
All right, Dana, thank you so much. I hope you have fun. I'm sure it's going to be exciting. Thank you.
Yes, very curious to see what's next.
All right, so we can't leave you today without a proper national forecast. So we're going straight to Ginger Z. Some trouble in the Northeast, right, Ginger? All right, so no Ginger, no weather update today. But all right, my friends, I hope you are taking good care of yourselves. You're going to want to check out the Mueller Report special coverage at 1:30 p.m. today. And after that, we have the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. and World News Prime at 8 p.m. If you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks. I'll see you tomorrow.